very fascinating for me. What is it? What are some of the major milestones for you? I want to understand your life journey. If you can just help me understand that, that would help me put perspective to things.
Oh, thank you. I am glad that you have read some of my books and you are interested in knowing through the lens I wear. I think that's very interesting. I think if I have to look at milestones, you see, one does not really think of them as milestones until you start reflecting about your life. When I started in recent past reflecting about my life, I think everything I went through seems to be a milestone. The first milestone I can talk about is my education at Loyola College. In my school, for some reason, I was an average student until my 10th standard, but 11th standard, when I got the results, I was quite surprised. I topped the school in mathematics, and so it was easy to get admission into Andhra Loyola College, which is one of the best colleges in Andhra Pradesh in those days. So I joined the pre-university there and did mathematics, physics and logic, MPL, that's what they used to call it, and then did my BSc. I don't think I have learnt much in my BSc. I was more of an average student. But even to get a good second class is considered great in those days because the professors never gave marks easily. I was interested in chemistry, not because I have understood much of chemistry, but more because people said that this is a good thing to do, your MSc in chemistry, and I suppose chemistry is one of those subjects where from mathematics I shifted and then I got good marks. So I was wanting to do my MSc chemistry, and the Loyola College principal felt that I am too young to do my MSc. So he said that you will probably get admission into MSc chemistry, although you are just a second class BSc, but not too many people go for MSc. But I would recommend you to go for MSc after a couple of years, and 2 years I will give you a position of a demonstrator in the chemistry lab. So you can improve your own kind of a knowledge and then go for it. So I was getting ready to pick up a job as a demonstrator at a young age. And one fine morning, the Loyola College principal is a Italian father who for some reason liked me very much. He wrote a letter to me saying that I got an application form for you. There is a college of education that was started in Mysore called as Regional College of Education by National Council of Educational Research, NCERT. And the most interesting thing is they give you the same amount as stipend as what I would pay you as a demonstrator. So its advantage is for you go and do your B.Ed and you will get the stipend, and after that you come back, you will have one more year of demonstrator here and then do your MSc chemistry. I think this letter of Father Gordon, who wrote to me, was in a way a milestone. I immediately went. He got the application form for me. I filled the application, and the next thing I knew was that I was called for an interview. And when I went there for interview, I was probably the youngest among all the applicants, because normally for a B.Ed course, which pays a 75 rupees stipend in those days, and meant for all the 4 southern states, which included Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, in those days Tamil Nadu was called Madras, and Mysore and Kerala states, 4 states. There were people with MSc who had teaching experience, and there were people with BSc with a lot of teaching experience, but I think for some reason I myself don't know what exactly it is. I was selected in the first list itself, and I was so happy I stayed on there. I have a feeling one of the reasons why I selected was maybe I demonstrated a little bit of versatility, because I used to participate in dramatics there and then go give some stage performances and things like that. So I must say that my B.Ed was a very, very important milestone. I think that is where I was learning actually in the classroom. I never learnt, I only mugged up and passed exams in BSc, But when it came to B.Ed, I used to sit in the class and every single statement made by the professor there used to just get inside. I read a lot of books there. In fact, I started reading science books at the time when I was learning about psychological foundations of education and so on. It was at the end of the 1 year B.Ed. That was a very enriching period. I had some good friends, and then I was guiding people and doing a lot of things. It was at this point of time the professor of psychology who taught me psychology was a great professor. He just returned from US. He used to, I think he did his PhD. He is a Gujarati, Prafulla Chandra Dave, and we never understood in those days a Gujarati professor, what does it mean? I mean, for us, Dr. Dave, P.N. Dave, the style with which he would walk and talk is more of an American. So, he worked with one Richard D. Charms. He used to talk about it, and he studied risk-taking behavior in school children. Now, remember, this was 1965, 66, and today is 2018. This is almost about 53 years. I still remember Praful Dave talking about Richard D. Charm's work in school children and so on. That is the impact that he has made on me. I used to listen, and at the end of the year, I topped the university in science education, which was again a surprise for me. I never knew that that is going to be the kind of thing. Then Praful Dave asked me, what are you going to do? I said, now my path is clear. I am going to do my MSc chemistry, but I will pick up a year's job for to be demonstrator in Loyola College, and then I will go for MSc chemistry. He said, you will be wasting your life. That's a very important thing. I asked him, why do you think so? He said, you have a special aptitude for psychology. I have seen you, I think you are wonderful in this, and I think you should do your psychology. So, I was quite surprised, and I said that, look, I am interested in psychology. I used to read a lot of books of Dale Carnegie even in my BSc and so on. But I am happy that you are telling this to me. Who is going to admit me? Because all MA psychology admissions are based on whether you are a BA in psychology or not, and here I am a BSc with mathematics, physics, chemistry and a B.Ed. He said, that is true. I am not very familiar with the Indian education system. However, I know a professor who might make an exception for you. I will write a letter explaining the curriculum we had. Praful Dave used to get rats into the class and teach us how rats learn, and tell us quite a bit about, in those days, 1965, that was the time B.F. Skinner from Harvard was becoming famous on teaching machines and so on. So, Dave would demonstrate how rats learn in the class, operant conditioning and many interesting kind of things. So, I suppose he thought that I am genuinely interested in psychology. So, he wrote a letter to Osmania University, one professor, Parameshwaran, who himself came from Madras, and he was heading the department. So, I went to this university and gave this letter. In fact, that was a very remarkable day. When I went to the university department of psychology, in front of the head of the department of psychology room, I saw a young boy smoking cigarette, puffs and leave like this. These young fellows smoking. I never smoked cigarettes, of course, on an experimental basis once or twice, yes. So, I was quite amused, and I went and asked him, where can I find the head of the department? I went inside, he was not there in the chair. He said, you want to see the head of the department? Okay, hold on, I will take you to him. So, after about 5 minutes after he finished his smoking, he said, come, I will take you. He went inside and he sat in the professor's chair, and he said, now what do you want? I was quite stunned. Such a young fellow is the head of the department of psychology. Fortunately, I did not say anything to him when I saw him smoke. Then I gave him the letter, and he looked at it, and he asked me a few questions, and he said that I will make sure that you are admitted, because we need people with some kind of an interesting background like this. If Dave writes about you, there must be something good. Our policies do not admit only masters in education, but for you as a regional college, I will make an exception. I think it is very interesting. A professor in those days could argue with the university and find out exceptions and take decision at his own level. So, he admitted me to MA Psychology, and I think another interesting thing in Masters in Psychology was the professors we had. It was more like a family. I suppose this is something which has always influenced me in terms of my entire approach to human resources. I was lucky to have had a principal who would get an application form for me, a professor who would suggest that you will be wasting your time and in chemistry, your aptitude for psychology, and another professor who would go out of way to admit me, and we used to go to his house. We used to have a lot of picnics, and we were just a small group of about 15 students. And many of my classmates were, some of them were already masters in sociology, masters in philosophy, but some others were masters in education and so on. And again, I think to my surprise, I topped the university. Not only I topped, but also I am told I created a record which was not broken for several years later. So that only shows that I had that real aptitude for learning psychology. I used to live almost about 25-30 kilometers outside university for the first few months, and even in buses I would pick up books on and read about Sigmund Freud or Alfred Adler and things like that. So, I think that is just the interest in understanding human behavior and so on. So, this is another milestone, but I must say that during my masters in psychology, a very important milestone was there used to be a person, we heard this person by name Uday Parikh. Uday Parikh, I heard that he was president of the Andhra Pradesh Psychological Association. He was the director of behavioral sciences in Small Industry Extension Training Institute. This is 1966 to 68, 67 I am talking about. Uday Parikh left for states. He was working in with the University of North Carolina, and one of my seniors by name on Kodandapani was given admission to do his doctorate at University of North Carolina. So, we went to the airport to see him off, and it got into my mind that look, if Kodandapani could go and work with Dr. Uday Parikh, why don't I also think of doing my PhD after my masters. So, I had this kind of a desire, and 6 months later Kodandapani writes saying that he had Uday Parikh has sold his car to him for, in those days, maybe some $500 or whatever, and now he is driving a car. That makes you also feel more interested in your attempts to go to do your PhD. Parameshwaran certainly encouraged me, and then he said, I will write to Uday Parikh, but before I do that, I will put you in touch with CET Institute where he has worked. So, I did my master's dissertation in 1967 somehow, and I say it is a very important milestone, because the study was on correlating organizational climate of small scale industries with the productivity of small industry employees. Now, it is interesting because even today when I look back at my thesis, I think it is almost equivalent to nowadays what I see as a doctoral dissertations and so on. I think we studied to review the literature on organizational climate, and to work with a person like one Dr. Somnath Chattopadhyay. Chattopadhyay used to be another director of behavioral sciences in CET Institute. He was apparently a student, of course, later I came to know, in those days we only heard stories, student of Uday Parikh. He himself was studied at Stanford University and so on, and he made us read a lot of books. He will pick up Rensis Lickard's New Patterns of Management and pass it on to me and say, Venkatesh, read this book and see how you can create an organizational climate questionnaire including these questionnaires. We did a lot of literature review. Another interesting thing, and even today I think this is a classic case, is how do you, the small industries are divided into a variety. Somebody is manufacturing Krishi engines, somebody is manufacturing nuts and bolts, somebody is manufacturing pens. So, a variety of technology, a variety of things, but you have to compare the productivity of these people. So, I studied and then came up with a methodology called as work sampling. Actually, it is also known as time sampling. That means every half an hour in an industry, you want, if you are surveying 15 to 20 people, you have a particular time. Every 5th minute you will see somebody, 7th minute you will see somebody, 11th minute you will see somebody, and so on. You go around just noting down whether the person is working or not working. So you have hundreds of observations. At the end, you can count who is working, who is not working. You can have a composite index of the industry. So that is the measure of productivity, and ask the same person what does he or she perceives the organizational climate as. In those days, of course, there are not, in fact, I can't recollect any female worker working in small industries. It's largely male workers. Uh, so the relationship between how the person perceives the organizational climate and the productivity. I say it's a milestone because I think this study, it's a 2 months work, but may have got extended to 5-6 months. But it just gets into your mind, and then you start really thinking that this is something which is worth investigating, and so on. So I submitted a report to CET Institute and also submitted to Osmania University more for my master's dissertation. This was a classic kind of thing. I learned a lot at that time. So this is a very important milestone in my life, the master's dissertation, and passing MA with and all the subjects that I have learned were wonderful. The teachers were great, and they remained friends all through my life. Some of them are no more. Parameshwaran is no more. One Yadagiri Reddy is no more. Tara Manohar is somewhere in USA. Govardhan Reddy is in Hyderabad. He went to Ohio and returned back, and so on. So we knew all the classmates, everyone. I think it was like a family, and so on. It's an important milestone. It was at this time, I think, I heard from Uday Parikh that I am sorry I can't take you for PhD because I am returning back to India. So all that I can do is I can write a letter to some professors I know. First one I am writing is I am writing to Rensis Likert. So we only heard Likert is a great man because we heard of Likert scales. I read his book on new patterns of management. I was very excited that Uday Parikh is recommending me to Rensis Likert and at the University of Michigan. But you know, 1966-68, our knowledge base, every letter used to take almost about 6 weeks to 2 months to reach USA. Our knowledge of US is very limited, and it's only a few months later, Rensis Likert wrote to me saying that I don't find your application form, and I said I have applied. Then he wrote again saying that since I don't find the application form, please check whether you applied to University of Michigan or State University of Michigan. So I then discovered I applied to Michigan State University, whereas Likert was at University of Michigan. So the question of my joining Likert, I think didn't arise, but since Parikh was coming back, I thought it's good to work with Parikh. Not to waste my time, I got a job in Andhra University to start the Department of Psychology. Professor Ramakrishna Rao, who was Professor of Philosophy, a librarian, and Professor of Psychology, started a new department called Psychology and Parapsychology. He invited me to join him. He couldn't give me a formal appointment, but he gave me stipend to work on some interesting topic. He was interested in dreams and parapsychology. So he suggested that I work on subliminal perception of matter and how it impacts your dreams. So I registered for my PhD, but I think I didn't stay there longer than about 7-8 months, because in about 7-8 months time Uday Parikh returned back, and since I had a desire to work with him, he, as soon as he came back, he offered me a job as it was called as assistant research officer on a Indian Council of Medical Research project with the National Institute of Health Administration. So the moment I got the job offer, I was halfway, although I was not formally a lecturer for the students. I made sure that I completed my whatever I wanted to teach them in the MA first year of psychology at Andhra University, and 2 months before they had their exams, I left for Delhi, joined Uday Parikh. Now this is a very important milestone, because the project on which I was working, again I have learned a hell of a lot. All of these relate to later human resources. Looking back, they relate to human resources, but I must mention all this because these have some important implications. The study was the study of classroom teacher behavior, how teachers behave in the classroom, and the impact of classroom teacher behavior on student mental health, children's mental health. Now, mental health on the face of it sounds to be, I think, the Indian Council of Medical Research project, but in those days, again I must go back to 1968, World Health Organization defined mental health as an all-round health of a human being, particularly the psychological health, including, I think when you applied it to children, if the child is adjusted to the school, the child likes to go to school, child likes parents, then you consider the child as having good mental health. So, it is not negative side of illness or sickness, it is a positive side of mental health. So, in a school, the study was observe the teacher in the classroom, the way the teacher interacts with the children. The teacher behavior is analyzed on 10 different categories. These normally when you go to a classroom and you sit in a classroom, you keep observing what a teacher does. Normally a teacher will enter the class and then will if the children are making noise, silence. So, she will shout at them, she will discipline them, or if the children are silent, now she will say, what is happening to you boys and girls, are you happy, are you alive, are you with me, what happened yesterday. So, she tries to understand the feelings of the child, or reprimands them, or starts lecturing them, or asks questions. So, we identified 7 categories of behaviors of the teacher, and these 7 categories are called as directive categories and non-directive categories. If you lecture, it is directive, because you do not leave any freedom for the child to answer the question. If you accept the feelings, it is non-directive. If you question, it is non-directive, because a question provides an opportunity for the child to say yes, no, I do not know, etc., etc. So, accepting feelings, building on the ideas of the child, etc., these are non-directive. Lecturing, reprimanding, directing, criticizing, these are directive. So, every 3 seconds we use it to note the behavior of the teacher. So, in a minute 20 observations you make. Suppose she is lecturing, she lectures for 5 minutes. So, 5 minutes multiplied by 20, 100 times you will only put category 4, category 4, 4, 4, 4. All that you need to do is to document 4. Suppose suddenly she stops lecturing and questions. So, immediately category 3, or what happened to you, criticizes, category 5. So, at the end of an hour's observation, you can reconstruct the entire classroom behavior of the teacher and classify into is she a directive teacher or a non-directive teacher. It is called ID ratios. I is indirect, D is direct. If indirect direct ratio is more than 1, then she is a very participative democratic teacher. If it is less than 1, she is a directive autocratic kind of a teacher. That is the classification that we use to have. Then we studied children's behavior in terms of the extent to which they like to go to school, the extent to which they like the teacher, extent to which they are adjusted to their own other children and so on. So, we developed a tool for 4th and 5th grade children. It was called pre-adolescent adjustment inventory, a inventory to measure their initiative, a inventory to measure when they are frustrated, whether they take the frustration on themselves or on the outside world. It is called as impunitive, extraponitive, etc., etc. I think we studied all these kind of things, and we studied 50 primary school teachers across almost about a year's period. 50 primary school teachers, every teacher studied on different days, teaching different kind of subjects. Then we found something very interesting in this study. We found that directive teachers had students who had low adjustment to school, but high academic achievement. So, they did well academically, but did not like going to school, which was paradoxical, ironical. High non-directive teachers had children who liked to go to school, who are adjusted, who enjoyed going to school, but academically they were not all that. Now, we discovered that therefore, it is a choice one has to make, but they also discovered it is a choice one has to make in terms of mixing up directive, indirective kind of a behavior. Then we call these teachers for a training program, taught them the technique of directive, non-directive behavior, and gave them the feedback about their own behaviors and ask them to see whether their behaviors are in the right direction, whether they want to change. It's the most interesting project, 1968 to 71. This is the 2-3 years that I worked there, and it has phenomenal lessons later to draw for HR in corporate sector. I think what happens in schools, what happens with teachers, happens with leaders, what happens with CEOs, with everyone. And feedback works like magic. When you observe somebody and give a feedback to this person, the impact of his or her behavior on other people, it has a lot of provocative and also a motivating kind of an impact. This has formed the basis later for my formulating a 360-degree feedback. In fact, I proudly tell people that much before the Americans invented 360-degree feedback, we were using it in India. We did not only give the name because we are not good at branding and having our own IPR. In fact, India does not believe in it. Otherwise, we would have had IPR for our haldi and basmati rice and all these kind of things. So, we never, I think, had this kind of, we did not even think that all these things can be put into something like an IPR and so on. So, this was a important milestone in my life, because that lesson, that research, which was later, I think Uday and I produced it as a book, which is published by ICFI, Changing Teacher Behavior Through Feedback. This was a book written, published after almost about 25 years after we did the work, but the work itself was published as a motivation training for mental health, ICMR project at the National Institute of Health Administration. I must say, during this period where I was working in this project, another milestone that happened was that NEHI, where the project was the project of the Indian Council of Medical Research, based in National Institute of Health Administration. So, I was an employee of ICMR working in NEHI, but NEHI itself needed a assistant professor of education and training. By the time I had only 2 years of experience, a master's in psychology, a BSc and a B.Ed, unusual combination. But they wanted a person with 5 years, because an assistant professor in medical parlor is a associate professor of universities. It is equivalent to those days reader. So, they wanted somebody with a 5 years experience, with education background and science background. I had science background and education background. Of course, they did not ask for a PhD in those days, but 5 years experience. I did not have 5 years experience, therefore, I would not even think of applying. But apparently, Uday Parikh felt that they can't get a better candidate than me, and in those days the chairman of the recruitment committee was the director of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, one Ramalinga Swami, Dr. Ramalinga Swami, famous Padma Bhushan, later he got awarded as Padma Bhushan, he is no more. He was chairman. Uday Parikh apparently drove to his house and handed over my biodata and told him that you are not likely to get a better candidate than this. He cannot apply because he is not eligible. So, contact him as a contact candidate. In those days, there used to be a provision in government, if somebody he has some extraordinary, he can't apply, he is not eligible, or some extraordinary reasons and so on, you can always call him as a contact candidate. So, I never applied for this job. I was called as a contact candidate. I was interviewed and was offered assistant professor of education and training, which is, I think, again a surprise in my life. I think all these things keep on telling you something about life, that if you are meritorious, I think somebody will capture you, and something or the other is likely to happen. So, it is your work and competence that matters and things of that kind. So, I became assistant professor of education and training, did my also 6-month online certification. In those days, online means there was no computers, online really means by correspondence and so on, go for a 2-week kind of a program. So, I did a certificate on programmed instruction with NCERT, and this was my interest in learning. And Uday Parikh was, in fact, Uday Parikh in those days across the world was known as a bibliography man. Bibliography man means he consolidated the work of others, publishes in the form of annotated bibliographies or research abstracts, because those days we did not have internet. So, he worked like an internet. He said, if I am a researcher, if everyone does research, who is going to disseminate this research? So, he took upon himself, I would say that in those days he symbolizes the modern Google, modern internet, modern whatever you want. So, he had all behavioral science researchers documented and a series of directories he brought in. So, one day he said that, look, I have done this, but I want to make it on a regular basis. Is it possible, he told me, Venkatesh, is it possible for you to visit some of the libraries in Delhi, visit all the behavioral science journals and abstract the journals which have articles on Indian behavioral science? He mentioned this. I took about 2 months time, visited all libraries. Now, it is significant. Working in Greater Kailash, which is a corner of Delhi. In those days, Greater Kailash is really a corner of Delhi. Those days, nothing else was developed. After Greater Kailash was all barren lands, Kalkaji and so on. Sitting there, visiting every nook and corner of Delhi. I went to Delhi University, Institute of Economic Growth, went to USIS, British Library. So, you get to know a whole lot about Delhi, visiting libraries, Indian Institute of Public Administration, and in a 2 months time I produced 247 abstracts, and somebody else did 3 more abstracts. We had 250, and the journal called the first Indian Behavioral Sciences abstracts was out. I mean, that was done in so another milestone in my life. So, the project and this one, and then I think working here. I must say something very interesting happened at this point of time. I wrote an article on how to teach statistics to medical students. This article got published in Journal of Preventive and Social Medicine. One of the editorial staff, professors, who was a member of the editorial board of this particular journal, joined as my boss in the National Institute of Health Administration and Education. The first thing that he got after he joined as Professor of Education and Training, and I was his assistant professor, is a copy of the journal, and he noticed my name in that and my article. He called me and he said, it's a very interesting article. Did you take the permission of the institute to write this article? I was stunned. I said that, look, I thought this is my job to write articles. No, even if it is your job, you have to take permission. You should have taken the permission of this institute. Since you have not taken, I am going to write a remark in your confidential report. And he wrote a remark saying that I have disobeyed the institute rule and so on. But having said this, I must say he and I remained very good friends later, because later when I wrote another article, I showed it to him and I said that now you give me permission. He went through the article, he corrected a few grammar, and he said that will be very nice if you add me as the second author of this article. I think I did that. I certainly took his suggestions and so on. I don't remember if I ever published that article, but this professor had remained as a very good friend, because though I think some of these medical people sometimes show their bureaucratic attitude because they are fairly rule driven, but they are also good at heart. In fact, I still remember when I joined IIM Ahmedabad, he would make it a point to visit me at IIM, take my guidance for his daughters, whether she should do masters in anthropology or sociology and things of that kind, and so on. But that somewhere got into my head that in working as a Ministry of Health and among doctors may not be the best thing that should happen in my life. So, that was the time Uday Parikh was invited to start psychology department in Udaipur University, and he asked me if I would join him. I readily agreed and went to join the university to start an applied psychology department. Applied psychology department at a, I mean, looking back, sometimes I feel funny, at a grade below. I was already assistant professor, but I joined as a lecturer. However, they protected my salary and all that. It didn't matter to me. The designations didn't actually matter. So, I was there for 2 years, and those 2 years were significant because I remember every single student that we taught those 2 years. It was again like a family. And in fact, we proudly say that every student even today One of the students happened to become later Union Minister for Rural Development, one Dr. C.P. Joshi, and even today he is no more a minister. As governments change, parties change, I think they keep changing. He remembers me once in a while. We remember the great time that we have had. Of course, he himself was a professor. He did his PhD in psychology and all that. So, all the students there, every single student, we were in touch. Some of them became professors in MS University, Baroda and so on. So, those 2 years and those I think about 30 students were gems that we have produced. Udaipur University that way is not one of the great universities like JNU or IITs and things of that kind, but we are very proud of every single student from that particular place. I must say this was another milestone more in terms of the students and so on. Then the next milestone is IIM Ahmedabad. Uday Parikh joined IIM and we were writing a book on status study of population research in behavioral sciences. I came here to write the book along with him. This was in 1973. When I was working with him, I used to go to his office and prepare the manuscript, and it was getting typed and so on. So, that was the time Uday said, why don't you think of moving to IIM Ahmedabad? I looked at the biodata of all IIM professors. I said almost all the professors here, except maybe you are an exception, sir. You are a very senior person, accomplished person, renowned person. You worked in US, but all of them have American degrees, foreign degrees, and I have only an Indian PhD. At that time, I already have done my PhD, registered with Sardar Patel University while I was with National Institute of Health Administration. And my PhD topic was on organizational environment of medical colleges and the impact on socialization of students. Very interesting parallel between master's dissertation. In place of an industry, it is a college. In place of productivity, it is what values do you develop in students, socialization of medical students and a medical college environment. Very interesting kind of in those days I did not think. Now, while looking back, I see so many patterns that have emerged in life and so on. So, Uday said, no, do not worry about it, because Ravi Mathai was the first director of this institute. He stepped aside and he is interested in applying management to education. So, he wants to start an education group. So, you are not having you are having all Indian education is a boon. So, that way it will very well suit. So, you come here, you apply and so on. So, I applied. I mean, I did not apply, I just gave my biodata to Uday. Uday passed it on to Ravi Mathai and passed it on to Samuel Paul, who was the director, and I interacted with all these people. I was writing book, but interacting with people. I still remember meeting Ravi and discussing with him, and one Vijayendra Tripathi at the time discussing with him and so on. And 2 months later, next thing I heard was that they are offering me to join IIM Ahmedabad as a member of the education systems unit as well as the organizational behavior area. Also, they said that the first project I will do is evaluate the entrepreneurship development programs in Gujarat. So, even before I joined, I visited Ahmedabad. Since I knew that I am going to join, I resigned from Udaipur University, and there was this entrepreneurship development program going on here. And there were 4 corporations, the Gujarat Industrial Investment Corporation, GIDC, GSFC, GSIC together formed an entrepreneur development center called as Parishram. I think it still exists today, but of course, it gave birth to the EDI subsequently. So, Parishram used to conduct entrepreneurship development programs based on David McClelland of Harvard University achievement motivation models. So, Dr. V Patel, who was the chief economic advisor, wanted to know whether these achievement motivation programs have any utility at all. Earlier, they ran for 3 years programs without any behavioral science inputs. Then the achievement motivation training came into picture. He said, we are spending money on achievement motivation, but does it make a difference? So, he wanted IIM to investigate. So, IIM proposed a research cum consulting project. So, they said, we really want to know whether achievement motivation training makes more entrepreneurs. So, even before I joined, I visited, and I actually wanted to observe an achievement motivation training in action. So, one AMT was going on in Kappadvanj, one Anil Trivedi was doing it. I went to Kappadvanj, stayed in, I am sure one can imagine what will be the state of affairs in a small town like Kappadvanj, stayed in a hotel where I must have eaten and got infected, because later I went back to Udaipur with jaundice. I mean, a few days after that, it took almost a month for me to get out of it. But I enjoyed observing the AMT and the way it was conducted. I think as Pakka, whatever is written in books, it was conducted, because the first achievement motivation training for entrepreneurship was done in SEAT Institute by David McClelland. So, I had that kind of a background and so on. So, my spending time, I am sure, must have also impressed the IIM professors. So, they thought that I am a good addition to the research and so on. So, as soon as I joined IIM, that was December 73, I was continuing the research project, and the book came for to be printed by the Tata McGraw-Hill and so on. So, I floated a course on laboratory in entrepreneurial motivation, that is another landmark. And I was teaching that course. David McClelland happened to visit India. He came and then took a session for the students in IIM. In fact, he gave a public lecture, and he heard about the work that I have done, and he invited me to join him at Harvard to translate, to Indianize a psychosocial maturity scale he was working on. So, he said, I will send you your I will take care of your travel and stay there for 3 months. You come there as a research associate at Harvard University and translate, do this particular kind of a thing. So, that is a remarkable, that is a milestone in my life. I had the opportunity at the invitation of David McClelland to go to Harvard University, worked with him. I actually worked with him in Harvard, as well as one of his students, Abigail Stewart, who is now at the University of Michigan. She heads the psychology department. She was a professor of psychology. She taught me the psychosocial maturity scale, which she and Uday were developing. So, living at Wesleyan, at Middletown and Harvard, I think are very interesting. First exposure to US. At the same time, I was also invited by East West Center, Hawaii. There was an entrepreneurship workshop going on. Somebody from East West Center visited IIM Ahmedabad. They thoroughly examined the entrepreneurship work going on in IIM, and they shortlisted 3-4 people to go to East West Center, and they submitted the names to the director of IIM. Director IIM did not think that I should be invited, so he preferred some of the senior professors to go there. But then East West Center said that, look, IIM has recommended other names, we are inviting them, but we want to invite on our own you to come. So, I went along with, well, actually there was another professor and 2 other Indians. So, 3 people from India, and I was the 4th one, a direct invitation. So, that also is another milestone, because in East West Center, Hawaii, 3 weeks I spent. I met people from Philippines, met people from Indonesia, met people from Malaysia, and we all formed a association, Entrepreneurship Research and Development Association, which never took off. But the fact that we had a lot of common kind of a thinking, and since I was working with McClelland, they were quite excited by this. They invited me to go to Malaysia. So, that way this becomes a milestone, working with McClelland, going to East West Center, working on entrepreneurship, teaching entrepreneurship here. All this resulted in both Uday Parikh and I doing a lot of work in Malaysia. I must have visited Malaysia at least about 15-20 times between 1975 and 1985, largely to build entrepreneurs there. And whenever I gave a public lecture, my entire theme was on, if you want to build entrepreneurs, start from school children. Teach school children to think entrepreneurially, and that is McClellandian kind of orientation. Even today I believe in it. I think the McClelland's theory says behavior is influenced by thought. The way you think, you will behave. Thought influenced by language, And if you can influence the language of any person, you can influence the behavior. And that is where, if you want to produce entrepreneurs, and that is what is HRD is all about. You put the right thoughts in the minds of people, then they can discover their potential and make great things happen. So I think these were formative in terms of years. All these got expressed in our forming the Human Resource Development Department. Now that is where I should probably now end the story, but let me say a few things and I will end, because that doesn't complete the milestones that begins the journey of HR, but it forms the foundation of the HR there. Larsen and Toubro invited Dr. Uday Parikh to examine their performance appraisal system. And their performance appraisal system was, I think, looking back in those days, one of the best. It is because Larsen and Toubro had 2 IIM professors working with them as executives. First was one Dr. K.K. Anand, who was a professor in IIM Ahmedabad, and after that was one Tarun Sheth, who also was a professor in IIM Ahmedabad, worked with them, helped them. And then later somebody from MS University who worked very closely with Vikram Sarabhai, one Denison Pereira. So you can't expect anything better in a performance appraisal system than people who have formulated it. And they had an appraisal which started with self-appraisal. In those days, these were the confidential reports time. Employee Service Record, ESR, that is what they used to call it. Those days, to think of a self-appraisal and a kind of a followed by a assessment on certain qualities and all that was unheard of. But even then L&T was not happy, so they invited Dr. Parikh, and Dr. Parikh invited me to join him as his second colleague consultant. So normally in IIM Ahmedabad, a senior professor worked with one of the youngsters. I mean, that is the way people built up, and of course Uday and I had long-term relationship, and therefore we worked together. So we interviewed. This is a very important, significant milestone in my HR life, because this is how we coined the term human resource development. We interviewed large number of people, and the interview strategy was, we will interview in each department a junior officer, his boss and boss, 3 levels. And I would normally interview the younger fellows, and Uday will interview senior fellows, although Uday made sure that I will also interview senior fellows. Any professor from IIM, I think even a senior manager would happily give data. Remember, I think I must have been 1975, hardly 28, 29 years, young professor from IIM Ahmedabad. And I distinctly remember interviewing somebody like Mr. A.M. Naik. He was probably an assistant manager in those days, but he made a phenomenal impact on me when I interviewed him about what is good about your performance appraisal, what is not so good about appraisal. I still remember a fat-looking young gentleman smoking, taking me out and asking critical questions. Where is performance in performance appraisal? Show me anywhere in performance and things of that kind. I think putting all the, we must have interviewed some 40-50 people in those days, or maybe more. We put all the notes of Uday and I together, and we came to the conclusion that if you want people to take performance appraisal seriously, we should define performance. Every individual should know what he or she is expected to perform, and it's not only he or she should know from the boss, he should be a partner to that, and it should be joint identification of what later we called as key performance areas. And then not only joint identification, it should be agreed, and then at the end of the year, the person who is a performer should have an opportunity to say what he has performed. And actually one should not wait till the end of the year, because at the end of the year, if you appraise performance, then there is no scope for change. Better to appraise performance every 6 months, if possible every quarterly. At the end of the first quarter itself, the person should say, this is what I have done, am I in the right direction? So you seek guidance. So if you have to identify, define performance, seek guidance, develop performance. Performance appraisal should help the person to build performance, be a good performer. The whole purpose should be to help the person to perform, rather than only appraise and bring unhappiness. So, the department, the personnel department or the bosses should see appraisal as a source of happiness rather than a source of unhappiness. And therefore, we said that look, today personnel department does not have the capacity to create happiness at workplace. So, we said that we need to think altogether different kind of thing. That is where we came up with the human resource development system, which really meant human resource development starts with identifying critical identifying job requirements, identifying critical competencies, assessing these competencies, giving feedback, building the career of the person, linking it with training and development, linking it with rewards in a way that people enjoy this and so on. And we call this, we put it in a system form, we call this human resource development system. I still remember the day where Uday Parikh and I was sitting in Taj Hotel and then exchanging our notes, and then Uday saying that Venkatesh, let us now create a new department, because personnel department does not have the wherewithal to do this. We call this department human resource development department, and then we worked out the principles and so on. So, that is 1975, 1976. We submitted our report. Hawk Larson was still there. There was a board meeting where we were asked to present. Hawk Larson attended the meeting. N.M. Desai was the president of Larson Tobro. In toto, whatever we recommended was accepted. They decided to implement the human resource development concepts, appointed a task force, and appointed us as a consultants to help the task force to guide the task force across the next 1 year, and asked us to look at, we recommended the personal function has to be reformulated, and they asked us to look at also what are the ways in which they could be reformulated. 6 months later, we submitted another report, that is what we called as designing human resource function, where we lifted up the human resource function, where we said people are the most important resource. Human resource function's main job is to create happiness at work. We didn't use the term exactly happiness, but we meant that kind of thing. Today, I think happiness is the currency that goes. We said people, I mean what we said was, at 8 o'clock when an employee catches the bus to go to the company, look at his face, he is going probably reluctantly, and at 5 o'clock he is heading to the home, he is happily coming back. We want to change this. If we have to make people to go happily to the company, company should become an exciting place to work. So, that is the purpose of human resource development department, that people should be helped to enjoy work. For that, I think the seniors should, the people matter, seniors matter. So, if you do not clarify the job, the person cannot enjoy the work. So, you need to clarify the job, you need to build the person in relation to the job, you need to understand the human capabilities. So, we said human resource function helps individual to grow as an individual. You may discover that you are in a job where you are working, but your talent is elsewhere. Can your job give you at least a 10% scope to discover where else is your? So, that is what we mean, develop an individual as an individual. 80%, 90% work for what you are told to do, but 20% do something which you like to do. So, develop individual as an individual. Develop individual to do the job that is assigned to him. That 80% also the person should do well. You have to equip the person with competencies. Develop what we call as superior subordinate relationships. For most employees, boss is the organization. If the boss does not smile, the person feels upset. The boss smiles, he feels quite excited. So, you may say L&T, but L&T for somebody means his boss. So, we said there is something like a individual chemistry. Every individual has a chemistry with his or her boss. So, we should help build this chemistry. So, develop individual as individual, develop individual in relation to the role, develop the dyadic relationship, develop the department, develop the team, develop inter-team collaboration, and develop the entire organization. So, human resource development aims at from individual to building organizations. The same a few years later I extended to the country, develop individual to develop the nation. I mean that is the way we use it to look at it and so on. So, that is a very important milestone of our life. That is the way we formulated, we discovered We formed the first human resource development department in the country, and Uday, of course, as a senior consultant and professor, infected the State Bank of India with this concept. State Bank of India in those days used to have a person by name Talwar, R.K. Talwar is a very famous legendary figure. He listened to Uday, and the board unanimously decided to adopt a HRD system, and all the associate banks implemented it. So, second in line was State Bank of India taking a formal decision to implement HRD. Third in line was Bharat Earth Movers, a defense ministry undertaking. Uday Parikh and S.K. Bhattacharya recommended that they should diversify, become a 70 crore company to 700 crore company. They suggested an organizational structure, and they said you should have an HRD department which can move you in the direction to become a 700 crore company. And then BEML asked Bhattacharya and Uday Parikh, now you gave us many interesting things, but how do we go about, where do we find HRD people? So, Uday Parikh said that I have a young fellow in IIM Ahmedabad, you get him. So, Bharat Earth Movers wrote to IIM. So, I was probably 32 at the time. Defense Ministry offered me a job to join them to set up the HRD department. I said, I have no intention of joining a defense ministry because I have seen enough bureaucracy in Ministry of Health. I will be quite happy to join as a consultant provided you give me the highest possible salary at your general manager level, because that is what is respected in the defense sector, your rank and your. So, they agreed to give me the topmost salary of a general manager, designated me as a general manager. I said that no, I would prefer don't give me general manager, because then I will have an executive responsibility and you will have all kinds of other issues. Since I do not want to join the company for full time, call me as advisor in general manager's capacity. I joined and stayed there for about a year, set up entire HR systems, actually 6 months full time, and later I went back and forth to set up HRD systems. So, these three were the milestones in building the HRD philosophy, disseminating it and so on. I want to quickly conclude by just highlighting milestones, and I will close it here. Now, for us HRD is a philosophy. Philosophy is, if a department exists, it exists to create happiness at work, to help individual to discover your potential, apply it to the organization, and if the organization can't take you, go elsewhere, apply it. So, you must discover your potential and apply it. For organization, every human being is a bundle of competencies. You should create an atmosphere to dig out these competencies. Do not look at people only from a limited angle. You should find out what they are capable of doing and create opportunities for them to explore their potential. This is what in Johari window concept we say, there is a part of your talent, you know it, others know it. There is a part of your talent which only you know it, others do not know it. And there is a part of your talent, others have seen it, but you do not know what others think of you. But there is 95% of your talent which neither you know nor others know. So, organizations should be able to provide at least some opportunity for people to discover talent. Like in my case, I never knew I am good at psychology until somebody told me. Maybe I would have been good at something else. Somebody told me and I discovered this particular part. So, I mean, it is life. I did not know that I am good in organizing things and so on, but I think I set up National HRD Network and organized it and have done a great job. So, you have to, it is only when you do it, I think you happen. So, this is our basic HR philosophy. So, for us HR is a philosophy, and HR meant lifting up the entire organization into human resources. If you lift up people, then you are likely to lift up the organization. That is the way we looked at it. But within 5 years of our starting HRD, personnel departments renamed themselves as HR departments without understanding that HR is a philosophy. Somebody from many people from US, in US I think it suddenly caught up as a fashion, and they renamed training and development as human resource development. So, some people who went to US brought the HRD as a new name for training and development. So, in India by about 1982-83, HRD meant human resource development, Parikh and Rao's method. It also meant new name for personnel department without understanding same old thing you are doing, messing up the entire, or it also meant training and development. So that was the time I decided that look, I am going to now fight this up and tell people. I wrote an article called HRD, is it a new wine in a old bottle, and so on. And we wrote a book called Designing HR Systems. And after that, when I was invited by XLRI Jamshedpur, XLRI, Larsen and Toubro established a chair professorship. So they've invited me to be the L&T chair of HRD. I was actually not interested in leaving IIM Ahmedabad. But when I came to know that they are about to offer this to somebody who I didn't think understood the HRD concept, I said I am not going to let this happen. So I accepted it out of my desire to simply make sure that HRD doesn't get diluted. So I negotiated with XLRI. I said I will come there provided you let me set up a center for HRD. I tried that in IIM. IIM didn't agree for a center for HRD because they said if every faculty member wants to set up a center of his specialization, there will be too many centers here, so I don't think we can take it. So it's fine. So XLRI agreed, and I went to XLRI to set up the center for HRD at XLRI to promote the HRD philosophy. 1.5 years I worked there, but actually within a few months after my joining XLRI, one of the most important points of my association with IIM, Ravi Muthai, died. So the day I heard Ravi died, I said, now IIM is calling me back. I have to get back because I have to continue to do some work which Ravi and I started doing here, and that was on education, making education more relevant to masses and so on. So that is called Javaja project. So I didn't tell, that's an important milestone. I didn't talk much about it. At some point of time I will talk about it. So I decided to come back. So how do I continue with the HRD philosophy? So L&T and XLRI had a understanding that as a part of the L&T chair professorship, we should conduct a national seminar. So I planned the national seminar in Bombay and got some 40 people involved in it. And one of the underlying designs was at the end of the national seminar, I should find a way to continue to do the HRD work which I started in XLRI. So at the end of the 4-day seminar we had in Bombay, those 4 days were wonderful days. There are many interesting stories which I will not narrate now. At some point of time I can talk about it. Those 4 days, I think one of the most significant things were some people were doing good work as HRD, but many people said HRD is just as a fashion for us. Our CEO recruited me as a HRD person. I don't know what to do. He is only making me be used as an administrator and so on. So we thought therefore there is a need to disseminate HRD. And on the last day of our seminar, we said we have learned so much from each other. Should we learn only if XLRI organizes a seminar or L&T facilitates this? Can we continue to learn? People thought about it. Now, how do we continue to learn? Should we meet only when XLRI? Why don't we meet on our own? So we discussed, yes, I think we should meet, we should learn, and should this learning be only 40 of us? Oh no, we should learn from other people. So the solution was to have a body called National HRD Network. We formulated the body at the time. So I took on myself, along with Father Abraham of XLRI, who later became director, to start the National HRD Network, which is a very important milestone in because that body still today exists. It's in some 40 and odd cities with about 15,000, 20,000 people. Every year a conference, every year there is a book, and so on and so forth. These are some of the milestones. I think I can go on and on. It's a long story. Yeah? 1 घंटा हो गया होगा.
Very fascinating. I really feel
It's only half the story.
great journey, I would say. So shall we now just focus on HR for a bit and then ask the
Yes.
challenging
Okay.
parts?
Yeah.
I think I understand one challenge was, of course, to make HR as a sophisticated term and not just
Yes.
understand personal to be HR.
Correct.
So I would highlight that. That is
Okay.
a critical movement that you led.
Yeah. So you want to ask questions or?
I will ask this now.
Yeah. So you know now what I mean when I say if I start, it will go on and on.
Yeah, it's okay. That's okay. I think more details the better. So don't
Yeah,
worry.
yeah, yeah.
I think this are well articulated. Let us cover this for now, and then I think I will also have a follow up set of questions because I
Yes.
understood more from you about you. So I think we might need to meet again.
Yeah, sure, sure, yeah,
So
yeah,
we will coordinate that and let you.
yeah.
Um, let's cover this for now,
Ah,
and
yeah,
then I
yeah,
could follow up.
yeah.
So what in your view is the role of HR department, and when do you say that they have been successful?
Okay. Uh, Role of HR department. Now, HR has different ways of looking at people. One way is if you treat HR as a philosophy. The most important role of HR department is to create a culture, create a climate where people are able to understand what they are capable of doing, apply themselves uh, to the organization, whatever tasks are assigned to them or not assigned to them, and make things happen. So, the most important role of HR department is to create enabling capabilities. I want to use the term enabling capabilities at individual level. Every individual should be helped to discover inner talent and apply it at the departmental level, at the dyadic kind of a level, and at the organizational level and so on. So, this is the most important. Now, how do you create enabling capabilities? If you have to create enabling capabilities, you should have therefore first respect for people. You should respect people. You should treat every individual as a person with unlimited capabilities. Nowadays, we use the term possibilities, human possibilities we talk of. Every human being as a possible uh, kind of a thing. So, this is number one. In addition, I think we say the important role of HRD department is to create commitment. So, we normally say HRD, the way it has evolved and it got disseminated is commitment building, culture building, competence building. Competence building I have already talked about. Commitment building means be happy to do your work. So, the HR department should create an atmosphere where people enjoy whatever they are doing. That is commitment building. By examining various mechanisms, you have employee engagement surveys, a whole lot of things. The third thing that the HR department should do is to create a culture. Now, a culture again where people feel happy to, we call it octopus culture. People feel free to express their views and opinions. Oh, people collaborate with each other and work like a team. They always think of the larger kind of purpose. C. Uh, People can be trusted. Whatever, when I say that I will do it, I will be trusted. Now, if I am to be trusted, I should be trustworthy. If I am trusted and if I am trustworthy, a lot of overheads of an organization can be saved. And a culture where people have some autonomy to do things on their own. People can take initiative and make things happen. P, standing for proactivity. A, for authenticity. People speak what they feel. Should feel free to speak what they feel. They should not be afraid. If I say something, the other fellow will get offended. No, if I feel so, I will say it. And you will also be able to take it because you respect me. I could have a different kind of opinion and so on. So, that is the uh, and C, for confrontation. Uh, Confrontation is when problems arise, we talk about the problems rather than putting them under carpet and so on. And E, for experimentation. Just imagine a company where everyone is free to express his or her views and opinions, collaborate well, treat everything with a larger kind of a perspective. They are trusted, they can take initiative, they experiment, they confront issues. I think that is the kind of a HRD culture that we can create. That is the role of the HR department. Very important role.
I think we'll do the books question in the next one.
Yeah.
Breakers, do you want anything?
Yeah, yeah, I know why suddenly feeling hot. Well,
Because the AC we had to turn it off
oh, okay,
because
okay.
of the noise.
Ah, okay.
Capture.
Oh, that is no fine, no
5 minutes
problem.
break लइए 5 minutes. We turn on the AC for a bit.
No, that's fine. Yeah, if I wipe it, it is okay.
I think there is because it's a bit loud.
Well, it is very, very difficult to say if there is one key message behind all my books. I keep saying that every book is like a film. Every book has a message. Every book is meant for a set of people. First, I would start with the most important, most referred book which Uday Parikh and I wrote in 1982, published in 1982-83. Actually, we wrote it in 78. Immediately after I returned from Bharat Earth Movers, we have conceptual part of human resource development and we have the practice part of it. And my implementation in Bharat Earth Movers, where I attempted to implement HRD as general manager or advisor in GM's capacity and so on. So, we said that it is high time we disseminate whatever we have done for these few companies, and we held a national workshop at IIM Ahmedabad, where we wrote chapters and tested it out, and which was later published as Designing and Managing Human Resource Systems. So, all that we HR philosophy, the principles, the practice, all of it is there in that particular book. It went through some 3-4 revisions, but this particular book's main purpose was to disseminate the idea of human resource development, HR philosophy, HR principles to the outside world. So, this is the most important publication in the HR field. The next most important publication I would say is, since the entire HRD started with performance appraisal, I was reviewing the performance appraisal theory and practice and wrote a book called Performance Appraisal Theory and Practice. That got published a couple of years later by All India Management Association with Vikas. This book went through many revisions. The latest is by Sage. It is titled as Performance Management for Global Competitiveness. So, from appraisal we moved on to performance management, because today we started believing that we have for 3 to 4 decades been making consistently mistake of focusing on appraisal. As I kept thinking about it, I felt that the term appraisal itself creates pain in the minds of people, and making appraisal as pleasurable is a contradiction in itself. So, I thought that we are focused on the wrong end of the performance appraisals, and I said we should now ban this term appraisal, because appraisal, whether you like it is not or not, is a part of anyway life's process. You are appraising yourself, you are appraising others. There is no need to be calling a separate system for it. But what is important is performance management. So, the first book on performance appraisal theory and practice, which got also translated into Bahasa Indonesia, it is available, I am told, at least for a couple of decades in Indonesia. From that book till now, performance management for global competitiveness or excellence and things of that kind. I think this is one set of books or one book which I feel very proud about, because constantly I have been maintaining that performance management means performance planning, performance analysis, performance development. And in the recent past I have also said, do not get into appraising performance and fixing people in a forced distribution or a normal curve that makes appraisal more painful. In fact, in our first report with Larsen and Toubro, we delinked appraisals from rewards. We did not delink performance from rewards, we delinked appraisal. We said appraisal is to give feedback, and if you want feedback to be objective, if the moment it is linked with the rewards, then it does not become objective, and therefore, do not link it with rewards. Work out your own mechanisms to link performance with rewards, but not appraisal with rewards. Ratings are symbolic, ratings are indicative, and ratings are subjective. This is the stand we have always taken. As long as no two human beings are comparable, or as long as two human beings are different, if everything is equal also, there will be differences in ratings and perception. Therefore, so my book on performance management in my view is a contribution to looking at performance improvement and things like that. The third book in the same HR profession, I must say, is 360-degree feedback. We used to use a lot of tools for giving feedback to people. For example, as a behavioral scientist and as a psychologist, my entire background has been helping people to discover the unknown. Sometimes it may be through labels. So, for example, if you have to be an effective manager, you should believe that you can be an effective manager. So, you should be optimistic. You should have, in the psychology jargon, what we call as internal locus of control. You should believe that you can make things happen, at least to some large extent. You should have self-confidence. So, we use a test called social reaction inventory, ask people to answer some 20-25 items, and on the basis of the way they respond to this, we give feedback to them. You are internal or you are not internal. So, this may be part of your problem, and that is why you are taking life easy, or that is why you are taking life seriously. So, you may want to improve yourself. This is normally the feedback that we give, whether you use MBTI or you use 16 personality factor inventory or California psychological inventory or a Thomas profiling. Anything you use, it is essentially feedback to you. So, a number of years, almost for the first 7-8 years of my work in IIM Ahmedabad, was administering tests and giving feedback to people, and people used to feel excited. But once in a while they would also ask me, Professor Rao, you gave me this beautiful test and told me whether I am an internal or not, and told me whether I am a trusting person or not. But how nice it will be if you can also tell me what other people think about me. This is what I think about myself, but I like to know if there is a way in which you can. That is when I hit upon the idea that I should run programs where I collect feedback from other people, and when the person comes for a program, give them feedback on their own self assessment, and after that give feedback on others. And I first ran this program in the year 1986, as soon as I returned from XLRI, and I was working on a leadership styles inventory. The leadership styles inventory that I developed was with McClelland's help and Abigail Stewart's help. We classified leaders into 4 categories. Actually, we later boiled it down to 3 categories. This is because I carried a lot of Indian data with me to Harvard, analyzed the data, and we started looking at the Indian managers as people with what we call as benevolent style. That is the term that we use. In the traditional Indian term, paternalistic style. Most of the industries that were started in 30s, 40s, 20s in India, you call it Birla Group or Tata Group and others, they all had paternalistic style. That means the person who started, the founder, is a father figure, and it is the founder's word which is the last word, and everyone is loyal to the founder, and they work very well as long as the founder is there, because the founder knows everyone by name, takes care of their personal needs, gets into. So, this is the paternalistic style, like a father figure. We found many managers in India follow this style. Their philosophy is that I have to treat all my juniors as my children and take care of their needs. When they are in conflict, I should resolve. I should understand their constantly who needs to be rewarded, etc. Second style we found is what we call as critical style. Now, these are the people who believe that people do not work unless you supervise them, like theory X. People need to be constant. There are parents who believe that the child has to be constantly guided, supervised, reprimanded, like the directive style in teachers and so on. Third style I found was the developmental style, which is a HRD style. Now, this kind of a leader believes that the best way to build juniors is by giving them independence, giving them encouragement, giving them, pointing out, give feedback in a way that they grow and develop and so on. This is a developmental style. If a junior makes a mistake, a developmental leader helps the person to discover the reason why he or she made a mistake, so that the person will not repeat the mistake. A paternalistic style person resolves the mistake, comes to the rescue of the person and resolves the person from the mistake. A critical style reprimands him. Like that, I mean, there are a whole lot of things. So, I developed this tool and I administered it on people and collected feedback on what juniors think. So, you come to IIM Ahmedabad, you have your own self assessment, then you have assessment for your juniors. You may think that you are a very developmental style, but your junior says, sir, you are critical style. Or some juniors say you are critical style, some others say you are paternalistic style. So, you know that you are behaving differently with different people and so on. So, all this gave rise to a program which we called as leadership styles and organizational effectiveness. I ran this program for about 3 to 4 years, and I think you name the company, they have gone through it by now. But in the first 4 years, Rishikesh Mafatlal has gone through this. A number of people from number of companies have gone through, and they felt that this is a very good program. In 1991, I discovered the same thing in US was called as 360-degree feedback, which means for 5 years what I was doing in IIM is christened in USA as 360-degree feedback. I left IIM in 95 and I continued to do, because in IIM doing 360-degree feedback was in some ways a nightmare, because it needed a lot of logistic support. In executive development programs of IIM Ahmedabad, those days IT is not that well developed, and therefore, we needed to use a lot of research assistants to tabulate data, analyze data, and make feedbacks available, and it is quite often a nightmare. And sometimes IIM Ahmedabad executive education programs won't allow you to recruit any number of research staff to assist you in your program, because it does not make sense in terms of having a large number of people and so on. But once I left IIM, I continued to do 360. I must tell you, I think by now in V Rao Learning Systems, the company that I have, I think we must have profiled about 25,000 to 30,000 managers for the 360-degree feedback. This includes Kumar Birla himself, for example, from Aditya Birla Group. In fact, he put through all his Birla Development Center employees. That means the next level, all CEOs of his company have gone through our 360 feedback. Taj Group of Hotels, at the time Krishna Kumar was the chairman, they went through our programs. Many of the Tata companies, including Titan and so on, have gone through our programs. We assisted Infosys also in developing a tailor-made tool based on competencies. Reddy Labs have gone through program. At one point of time, Satyam have gone through. So, you name it, I think most of the companies, I think at least about 60 to 70% of the top companies in India have gone through in initial stages of a 360-degree program. All this has resulted in my writing a book called The Power of 360-degree Feedback. So, this is published by Sage. It has undergone 2 editions. So, this is the other classic kind of a book which has made a lot of difference. While I was doing a 360-degree feedback program, I had come across some very interesting research studies from US. In US, a group of people studied top scorers in 360-degree feedback and interviewed them and found out what makes them top scorers in 360-degree feedback, and they came up with a very interesting book. I thought that I should do the same thing. So, from among about 15,000 profiles I had almost about 7-8 years ago, I identified the top scorers in 360-degree feedback. From the top scorers, I identified 300. Now, top scorer means these persons have made impact on their juniors, on their colleagues, on their seniors, and if necessary on their customers and so on. So, that means they had multiple impact. So, these are the good leaders. So, we interviewed, I along with another colleague of mine from TVRLS interviewed these people and documented their histories, and this was published as 100 Managers in Action. This is again an interesting kind of a book that we have written on 360-degree feedback. Of course, TVRLS has many publications on performance management, assessment centers, and 360-degree feedback. I am not going into this, but 2 other books I would like to mention in relation to HR is the HR audit. Now, HR audit has a very interesting history. I mentioned while talking about my work earlier that after we established the HRD department in Larsen Tobro, then followed by State Bank of India, then Bharat at Movers, and we started disseminating it, started Center for HRD in XLRI, and started National HRD Network as a professional body to promote HRD. When we have done all these kind of things, even then many companies were not following necessarily the right path of HRD. So, in early 90s, Aditya Birla was interested in HRD, and he initiated many HRD interventions in his group of companies. So, I understand that he was not very sure if all the companies are following meticulously whatever is the kind of philosophy he had in terms of HR practices. So, he suggested to his companies, why don't you get yourself audited? So, some of the Aditya Birla Group companies came to us at IIM and asked us if we can do an audit. I thought that was a good opportunity. In fact, I think any time when you evaluate a HR department or HR function, you are auditing. But this was the first time we systematically put a series of put our thoughts together. Uday Parikh was retired from IIM Ahmedabad. He was living in Jaipur. So, I co-opted him as my colleague to do the HR audit for some of the Aditya Birla companies. And we evolved a methodology, a unique methodology. Till today, you do not find any other book anywhere in the world which discusses HRD audit or which is titled as HRD audit the way we have titled it, the way I have titled it. I have not come across any. There are articles on HR audit, but I think this is the only book in HR audit which I published about 5-6 years later. But first we implemented the HRD audit process in Aditya Birla Group companies, starting with Indo Gulf, starting with some of their textile industries, their cement factories, and so on. I think many of the Birla Group companies, including I think later years, we also did a HRD audit for Alexandria Carbon Black in Egypt, and we found some gaps and sent somebody else. But I think all this gave birth to this book called HRD Audit, which is a classic book. It is also available, a translated version in Marathi, and it has gone through second edition in the recent past. And we run HR audit programs in other countries. In fact, I keep training trainers in audit. We call them Certified HR Auditors Program. So, this book is the basic book for this. Along with this book, there is a manual, accompanying manual called as HRD Scorecard 2500. This does an audit of a company and then gives points up to 2500 and so on. I think it is a very detailed manual. This manual is distributed to anyone who goes through our HR audit program and so on. So, these are essentially my human resource development related books, almost about a dozen of them in the field of HRD, and I consider each one as it stands on its own, each one had a purpose, and each one has made quite some impact. I must mention another book which I have written, which is not the corporate HR, which is the country HR. Now, this I consider as in fact a far better contribution than all the other HR books put together, if I have to make any comparison. This is the book I had done spending almost a year at Commonwealth Secretariat, London. Commonwealth Secretariat, London at the time had a division on human resource development, and a group of them, when they met in a conference, came up with the idea that nations which invested on human resource development in Commonwealth countries developed far better than those countries which have not invested on human resource development, but they also found exceptions. So, they had some doubts that why do not we exactly establish the linkages between HRD and economic development. So, they constituted an inter-country committee which was chaired by Sam Petruda. They have chosen an Indian to be a committee chairman, but had minister from Ghana, one of the ministers from Ghana, somebody from Canada, and somebody from Commonwealth Secretariat. Well, of course, I never formally met this committee, but this particular committee commissioned a research study where I was invited to examine the experiences of well developed countries in Commonwealth countries, less developed countries, examine their HRD practices, examine their economic development, and find the linkages between economic development and human resource development. So, I spent about 6 months at Institute of Development Studies at Sussex and with Commonwealth Secretariat, did a lot of literature, visited some of the countries, went to World Bank, had detailed discussions with Sam Petruda, who was living in Chicago at that point of time, and went to John F. Kennedy School of Government, many other schools, collected a lot of data and wrote the report. The report was published as Foundation for Future, and this particular report was circulated among the Commonwealth heads of government. You will only find my name acknowledged as a consultant, because the report was authored by the committee members rather than me. But because I have done all the work and only part of my work found its way into this, I published my work actually in a book form. This is called Human Resource Development Experiences and Cases, and this is an unusual book, because this book deals with human resource development in national context and in the Commonwealth context. I have identified, I think, almost about a dozen imperatives for any country. If you want to develop economically, you have no alternative but to invest on children, you have no alternative but to invest on education, you have no alternative but to invest on women and their development, no alternative but to invest on technology and science, no alternative but to invest on making government entrepreneurial, no alternative but to look at not for profit organizations, promote NGOs and so on. So, about a dozen imperatives, each imperative is a chapter, and I am very proud of this book. This book is the only one which has not undergone any revisions, although I think there is enough scope to revise. It was published now almost about 23 years ago, and I still think that whatever has been said is valid. And it stands out by the fact, when I wrote the book, India stood at 90th rank out of 111 countries in terms of our human development index, and today we are 130 out of 184 countries. So, that means we have consistently been low in our human development, though we are the single largest democracy in the world, second largest populous country in the world, third technical manpower in the world, but we do not know how to live longer, and we do not have the same quality of life as many other countries have. So, we have consistently been poor. Of course, there may be reasons, the country is complex, justifiable kind of reasons or not justifiable kind of reasons, but this book gives, and whatever is said in the book is a policy guideline for any Commonwealth country to build itself, because the book concludes, if you do not invest on people, you cannot develop economically. It of course does not mean that all automatic investments on people will lead to it. So, this is a classic kind of a book. These are all my books on human resource development. There are, I think, stray books like Readings in HRD, and National HRD Network published many things, Recent Experience in HRD, Alternatives in HRD, everyone published in a particular year to suit the requirements of that particular year, to suit the thinking at that particular year. If we felt that HR profession is in danger, it needs to be rejuvenated, we publish a book on excellence for HRD by putting experiences of various people on developing HR people. If we felt that HRD for workmen is not getting enough of attention, we write some book on HRD for workmen. So, there are, I think, many of these which are, I think, that is why I said every book has a story, every book is like a film. Not everyone may be a great film, but it served its purpose at this particular point of time. These are all my books in HRD. I must mention something which is which not many people will understand and appreciate. I think that every other work I have done is also HRD. Like I have written books on managing health centers. This is a very interesting book on, if you are head of a clinic or a primary health center, how do you manage it well. Managing health center is meant to again human resource development, if you consider health as an important. Similarly, I have written books on management process in universities, which Uday Parikh, Ravi Mathai and myself, or adult education for social change. I have a lot of books on education, which I am not talking much about, because if you treat education as human resource development, you have another 8-9 books which deal with managing universities, including I think I have documented excellence in management, the case of IIM Ahmedabad. I think is a beautiful book which we brought out for the Golden Jubilee celebrations of IIM Ahmedabad in the year 2010. This was, I think, this documents the entire experience of IIM Ahmedabad. So, that is why we called it Nurturing Excellence, the case of the Indian Institute of Management Ahmedabad. That is also human resource development. So, I mean, these are all, there are many of these, and then entrepreneurship is also, if you treat it in a HR way. So, I have written on developing entrepreneurs, handbook for developing entrepreneurs and so on. So, there are almost about 60 books, but a large part of them directly, indirectly deal with human resource development from various angles. It's a long one.
So, sir, do we want to continue right now? What I was thinking is, I want to ask some of the softer questions on how do you see
If
leaders.
you go through my other thing, you can,
I want to go through that, but what I also want to unveil from you, that we'll highlight the achievements for sure, but what I want is your perspective on how you see HRD has evolved over the years.
Yeah.
Because you will definitely have a great.
Yeah. In fact, I have some of my YouTube videos talk about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, or else I can see that, and if we don't need to duplicate it, we might not duplicate it.
Yeah, there are 4-5 minute videos.
But
HR is,
we
yeah.
will not. So
Yeah.
if you want to make this like a 5
Yeah.
minutes, we just need to 10 seconds out of it and all the key message out of it. So do you want to do it at a later stage, and I will send you questions before.
Fine, yeah. I think we have
would be helpful. Because
covered
you
some
have sent
important
me-
things. Yeah.
You sent me the profile.
Yeah.
What I will do is I'll send you questions beforehand.
Yeah.
And let's do this sometimes in the
Better. I think so.
post
Yeah.
Diwali.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll let you know the exact dates,
Yeah,
and you can coordinate on the dates.
Yeah.
I have now your email ID, so that helps.
What I'll do is, if you have your laptop, I got some.
I'm not really videos.
No, I have some pictures. I will give it to you.